The French Revolution, from the Bastille to the execution of the king. The storm was brewing in France. The air was thick with discontent, and the echoes of rebellion whispered through the cobbled streets of Paris. A single moment, a fateful charge against an ancient fortress, would ignite a fire that would burn through the monarchy, reshape the nation, and send shockwaves through all of Europe. This is the story of the French Revolution, a tale of ambition, betrayal, courage, and blood. Chapter 1. The Old Regime and the Seeds of Unrest. For centuries, France had been ruled by an absolute monarchy, a system where the king reigned with unchecked power, believing himself divinely appointed. By the late 18th century, Louis XVI sat upon the throne, his kingdom weighed down by economic turmoil, social inequality, and political corruption. The people were divided into three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners, with the latter bearing the heaviest burden of taxation while having the least political power. The nobility and clergy enjoyed privileges that isolated them from the suffering of ordinary citizens. The commoners, despite being the majority, had little say in the matters that affected their lives. Despite the grandeur of Versailles, where opulence knew no bounds, the streets of Paris told a different story. Bread shortages had become common, and the price of flour soared beyond the reach of the poor. Famines and crop failures in the early 1790s had exacerbated the misery, leading to widespread hunger and despair. The people, exhausted by years of hardship, became increasingly restless. The philosophies of the Enlightenment had taken root, spreading ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau questioned the very foundation of monarchy and divine rule, inspiring a new generation to challenge the status quo. The idea that power could be derived from the people rather than the divine right of kings resonated deeply in a France that seemed on the brink of collapse. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the American Revolution had proven that rebellion could lead to freedom, and many in France took notice. The success of the American colonies in overthrowing British rule emboldened French intellectuals and ordinary citizens alike. The American victory was seen as a powerful affirmation of the Enlightenment ideals that had been circulating in France for decades. In the salons of Paris and the universities, these revolutionary ideas found eager listeners. Secret societies began to form, and whispers of rebellion filled the air, promising that the French people could, too, break free from their chains. As the discontent grew, the financial situation of France continued to deteriorate. King Louis XVI, despite his attempts to reform, found himself entangled in the web of war debts, especially from France's involvement in the American Revolution. The tax system, already heavily burdening the lower classes, failed to raise enough revenue to cover the kingdom's expenses. Louis, in a desperate attempt to resolve the crisis, convened the Estates General in May 1789, a body that had not been called for over 170 years. The meeting was meant to address the financial crisis, but it quickly became a battleground for political power. The commoners, united in their frustration, demanded a greater say in the governance of France, setting the stage for a dramatic shift in the balance of power. As tensions rose, the storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, became a symbol of the people's revolt. The Bastille, a fortress prison that represented the tyranny of the monarchy, was seized by an angry mob seeking arms and ammunition. The fall of the Bastille marked the beginning of the French Revolution, a violent and turbulent struggle that would forever change the course of history. The people, once subjects to the king, now stood as agents of their own fate, determined to reshape France according to the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Chapter 2. The Summoning of the Estates General. The year was 1789, and France stood on the brink of collapse. The lavish court of King Louis XVI was struggling to maintain its opulence amidst a dire financial crisis. The kingdom was burdened by immense debts, and the price of bread had skyrocketed, leaving many of the common people starving. In a desperate bid to resolve the crisis, Louis summoned the Estates General, a centuries-old assembly that had not met since 1539. The three estates, clergy, nobility, and the common people, or Third Estate, were called together to discuss how to fix the kingdom's finances. This was a rare moment of unity for the nation, but tensions ran high from the start. Representatives from the Third Estate, who made up nearly 98% of the population, quickly realized that they were vastly outnumbered by the privileged First and Second Estates. They demanded that voting be done by head, rather than by estate, to give them a fairer chance at influencing decisions. However, their pleas were ignored, and it became clear that the king and the other estates had no intention of offering the common people genuine power. Frustrated, the Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly, a move that would change the course of French history. They took an oath on the tennis courts of Versailles, swearing not to disband until a new constitution was written that would reflect the will of the people, marking the birth of the revolutionary spirit. As the National Assembly moved forward with its bold vision, Louis XVI was caught in a web of indecision. At times, he seemed to lean toward concessions, yet at others, he appeared to prepare for violent suppression of the assembly. The streets of Paris buzzed with rumors, and the common people, who had grown weary of the monarchy's indifference, became more and more agitated. News spread that the king had called up troops, not to maintain order, but to crush the growing movement. What had started as a political dispute now turned into a full-blown crisis, with the people of Paris ready to defend their newfound power at any cost. On the 14th of July, the people's fears turned to fury, and a massive crowd descended on the Bastille, a symbol of royal authority and tyranny. The fortress had long been a prison for those who opposed the crown, and its fall would symbolize the end of the old regime. The mob stormed the Bastille with fury, overcoming the guards and freeing the prisoners within. They seized weapons and gunpowder, determined to defend themselves from the king's forces. The storming of the Bastille was a defining moment, signaling that the revolution was no longer a distant hope, but a full-scale revolt. This event would go down in history as the spark that ignited the fire of revolution across France and beyond. The people had begun to tear down the old symbols of oppression, and the seeds of the French Revolution had been planted. The king's authority had been severely shaken, and it was now clear that change was not just possible, but inevitable. The revolution had begun in earnest, and with it, a new chapter in world history was set to unfold. The Bastille had fallen, but the struggle for liberty, equality, and fraternity was just beginning. Chapter 3. The Fall of the Bastille and the Great Fear. The fall of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, sent shockwaves through the country, a symbol of both the people's anger and their desire for freedom. What began as a protest against the king's oppressive policies quickly escalated into a full-scale revolution. The once imposing fortress, a symbol of royal tyranny, was stormed by Parisians seeking gunpowder and weapons. The gates were torn down, the prisoners released, and the event became a defining moment in French history. To this day, Bastille Day remains a symbol of the people's victory over oppression and a rallying cry for freedom across the globe. The fall of the Bastille was the spark that ignited the Great Fear, a terrifying wave of panic that spread like wildfire across the French countryside. Peasants, already suffering under the weight of heavy taxes and feudal obligations, feared retaliation from the nobility. Rumors spread like wildfire, tales of aristocrats assembling armies to crush the revolution. In response, the peasants rose up, burning castles, looting granaries, and seizing land. The once untouchable feudal system began to crumble as peasants, empowered by the revolutionary spirit, fought for their freedom. As the Great Fear unfolded, the National Assembly recognized that swift action was necessary. In August of 1789, they took a monumental step, abolishing feudal privileges in a sweeping declaration that sought to dismantle centuries of inequality. The abolition of feudalism marked one of the first significant legal triumphs of the revolution. For the first time, the nobility's power was effectively stripped away, and the peasants were granted a sense of dignity and equality. Meanwhile, in Paris, political clubs began to emerge, each with its own vision for the future of France. The Jacobins, led by figures like Maximilien Robespierre, called for a radical transformation of society, while the Girondins, a more moderate faction, advocated for a constitutional monarchy. Despite their differences, both groups were united in their desire for change. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, drafted in August of 1789, proclaimed liberty, equality, and fraternity as the cornerstones of the new France, asserting that all men were born free and equal in rights. Yet, despite these revolutionary advancements, the path to true change was far from certain. The revolution was just beginning, and the political and social upheaval would continue to reshape the nation in the years to come. As the people of France fought for their rights and freedom, their ideals would clash with the realities of power, and the revolution would lead to even more dramatic and tragic moments in the history of France. Chapter 4. The King's Failed Escape and the Road to War. Louis XVI, increasingly overwhelmed by the revolutionary wave sweeping through France, made the fateful decision to flee Paris with his family in the dead of night. Hoping to escape to the royalist stronghold in the eastern part of France, he donned a disguise and left with Marie Antoinette, their children, and a small retinue. Yet, despite their careful planning, the royal family's flight was doomed from the start. As they passed through the village of Varennes, a vigilant local recognized the king, and soon, word spread. The royal family was apprehended and brought back to Paris, humiliated and defeated, their once unshakable authority shattered. This failed escape was a pivotal moment in the revolution. The king's attempted flight was not only a personal failure but also a betrayal in the eyes of many French citizens. It starkly revealed that Louis XVI was unwilling to accept the new political reality of a constitutional monarchy. The very idea of compromise with the revolutionaries dissolved in the face of his desperate attempt to flee, and with it, the fragile trust between the monarchy and the people of France evaporated. The calls for a republic, where the monarchy would be abolished altogether, became louder and more insistent. The revolution's fervor and momentum were matched by growing tensions with foreign powers. Alarmed by the events unfolding in France, monarchies across Europe feared the spread of revolutionary ideals that might inspire uprisings in their own kingdoms. Austria and Prussia, the most powerful neighboring nations, took decisive action. They declared their intent to restore the French monarchy, demanding that Louis XVI be reinstated to power. This intervention sparked the outbreak of war, and France was soon embroiled in conflict with foreign armies. As war loomed on the horizon, the revolutionaries found themselves in a perilous position. They were not only confronted by foreign invaders but also by the threat of internal betrayal from within France itself. Fearing that royalist factions might rise up against them, the revolutionary leaders grew increasingly radical in their measures. The stakes were higher than ever, and the revolution had entered a new, more dangerous phase where moderation was abandoned in favor of urgent and often violent action. The road to war was now a road to revolution's ultimate climax. Chapter 5. The Terror and the Trial of a King. The year was 1792, and the revolution had already shaken the foundations of France. Amidst the chaos, the radical Jacobins, a group of political extremists, rose to prominence. They were led by Maximilien Robespierre, an intelligent yet ruthless man whose unwavering belief in virtue justified extreme measures. The monarchy had already been abolished in September, but it wasn't until the trial of King Louis XVI in December that the full scale of revolutionary fervor became clear. Louis was accused of conspiring with foreign powers to overthrow the revolution, an act seen as treasonous. After a swift trial, he was found guilty by a majority vote and sentenced to death. On the morning of January 21, 1793, Louis was led to the scaffold in the Place de la Révolution, where the guillotine awaited. As the blade fell, it was not only the life of a king that was taken, but the final threat of the old regime. The execution of Louis XVI marked a pivotal moment in history, signaling the definitive collapse of the French monarchy and the establishment of the First French Republic. The once divine right of kings was obliterated in an instant, and France was now a republic in name, but a nation divided and uncertain. The streets, filled with eager spectators, echoed with the cries of Vive la République. While beneath the surface, the country was teetering on the brink of civil war. Revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity were tested in the fires of internal conflict, and the nation was racked with paranoia. This turbulent time gave birth to the Reign of Terror, a period that would forever be associated with bloodshed and fear. Under the leadership of Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety, the revolutionary government enacted drastic measures to protect the Republic from perceived enemies. The guillotine became the instrument of justice, with thousands, both royalists and suspected counter-revolutionaries, meeting their end at its sharp blade. Queen Marie Antoinette, once beloved and now vilified, was executed on October 16, 1793. Her death was seen as a necessary sacrifice to show that no one, not even royalty, was above the revolution. The terror reached its peak in the summer of 1794, when even the revolutionaries themselves began to fall victim to the same ruthless system they had created. Robespierre, who had once been a symbol of revolutionary zeal, found himself at odds with other leaders of the revolution. Fearing his growing power and influence, his enemies moved against him. On July 28, Robespierre was arrested and, within hours, executed by guillotine, an ironic twist of fate for a man who had been the architect of so much bloodshed. The fall of Robespierre marked the end of the Reign of Terror, but the scars left on France would endure for generations to come. Chapter 6. The Aftermath and the Legacy of Revolution. By the end of the Terror, which saw thousands sent to the guillotine, including many innocent victims, France was left in shock and exhaustion. The nation, once energized by the revolutionary fervor, now faced a sense of disillusionment. The brutal purge had claimed the lives of prominent revolutionaries like Robespierre, signaling the collapse of the radical phase of the revolution. In the wake of this terror, the new government formed was the Directory, a 5-member executive body. However, it was plagued by corruption, inefficiency, and a lack of popular support. The streets were rife with dissatisfaction as the nation's economy continued to struggle, and tensions between royalists, revolutionaries, and moderates escalated. Amidst this chaos, a brilliant and ambitious young general, Napoleon Bonaparte, emerged from the shadows. Born on the island of Corsica, Napoleon was quick to rise through the military ranks, thanks to his strategic brilliance and determination. In the year 1799, Napoleon staged a coup d'état, overthrowing the Directory and establishing himself as first consul. His rise to power marked the end of the revolutionary era and the beginning of a new chapter in French history. Despite the revolution's goal of a republic, the nation found itself under the rule of an emperor, Napoleon, who would go on to reshape the landscape of Europe. Although the revolution had ended with an emperor rather than the desired republic, its profound impact on France and the world was undeniable. The revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity spread across Europe, sparking revolutions and movements for change in other nations. The abolishment of feudal privileges, such as the privileges of the nobility and the church, fundamentally altered the social structure of France. One of the revolution's most enduring legacies was the Napoleonic Code, a legal framework that codified civil rights and liberties, which would go on to influence legal systems around the world for centuries to come. The French Revolution was far more than just a violent upheaval, it was a defining moment in history. It proved that even the most entrenched and powerful monarchies could fall, and that the collective voice of the people, once ignited, could change the very course of a nation's destiny. The revolution forever shifted the balance of power in France and set the stage for modern democratic movements across the globe. It was a powerful reminder that revolutions, while often tumultuous and violent, can alter the trajectory of nations, ushering in new ideologies and systems of governance that resonate for generations. And that's it, thanks for watching. If you enjoy exploring historical worlds, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on more exciting stories.